Morning, everybody. Hey, Erica. Good morning. It's friendly. Hey, Kim. How are you? All my favorite people are on here. This is awesome. Marty's on here twice. Rick, how's Babcock Ranch treating you? Tammy. Hi, Tammy. All right, before we get started, I think Mike is probably joining, but I don't know for sure. So I just wanted to share something first. I was shared with this presentation recently. So I work with Cogent Bank. I think they do an incredible job here locally. They're a Florida bank. They're growing exponentially, but the people there are very special. So if you need a bank, if you need help on that sense, just reach out to them. They're awesome. Brandon Box is great, and he sent me this. They had a presentation down there, and this was a presentation done by the local Fed representatives. Where are we headed in 2025? I thought this was really cool. One, they talk about the Fed, they talk about how it's developed. We're in the sixth district here. I think it's called district, which is based out of Atlanta. So they function on monetary policy, payment services, supervision of banks, regulation of banks, financial system stability, basically understanding the systematic risk, and then consumer protection and community development. Economic conditions. This is where they started really looking at, what they're seeing and why. And I thought this was cool because there's really no spin on it. I suppose the Fed has an agenda of trying to promote stability, but there's no other spin. There's no marketing spin or political spin necessarily. So I think this is a very reliable source. Economic activity continues to expand at a solid pace. Consumer spending has been resilient. They've been happy with that. The labor market has cooled from an overheated state. So overheated is a bad thing. And even companies like mine, I was struggling to get quality employees. I was struggling to get any employees. In fact, when I came down in 21, and 21 and 22, and then kind of into 23, I couldn't even get a receptionist to apply. And now that's not the same. So I might put out a posting in 22 and get 10 receptionists. Now, if I put out a posting, I'm going to get 50 or 100, which is good because now we can really hire the best people. Inflation has eased substantially over the past 2 years. It is no longer a top line issue. We see risk to achieving our employment and inflation goals as being roughly in balance. So, meaning that they've set certain goals to getting this economy in control, and they're optimistic. There is some uncertainty because you just don't know what will happen or what new thing will happen. I think that's the uncertainty is we don't know what else we don't know. Um, then they really gave really good details. So they really haven't seen a slowdown. The GDP is 2.4% growth. That's excellent. That works. Productivity has been rising sharply, making strong growth sustainable. So they don't believe that this is false. This isn't just some puffed up market that has no real substance. Consumer spending has been resilient. Every time they expect something to start to wane, it continues on a similar path. Strong household balance sheets and real wage growth is underpinning consumer spending. So real wage growth over just inflationary wage growth. Um, but the personal savings rate is below pre-COVID levels. That's probably not good, right? That would be the one thing, maybe this isn't sustainable. Consumer debt is growing. Credit card delinquencies are increasing. I know car loans have been a problem. The labor market has cooled from its formerly overheated state and simply remains solid. Conditions in the labor market are now less tight than before the pandemic. The US economy added over 220,000 new jobs in November, exceeding expectations. Anytime we exceed expectations, the market cheers. You'll get a really good boost. But employment growth has been strongly supported by the healthcare sector over the past 2 years. So it is a little bit more heavily weighted in one or two sectors than, more evenly spread out. Voluntary separations or quits are declining, and that is, a product of not being overheated, or they're symbiotic. So if you have a less overheated market or labor market, that just means less people are quitting voluntarily. While wage growth has been decelerating, most notably for job switchers, you're not seeing these huge jumps in income by switching jobs. Inflation has eased substantially, but remains elevated. Still too high. It's higher than they want it to be. Um, let's see what actual 12-month inflation. It's hovering just under 3%. When it was at its peak, it was at like 9 or 10%. So this is a huge improvement. The Fed policies that were put in place definitely have had an impact, a positive impact. They want it below that green line here. We're not there yet. It was essentially under the green lines for the last 20 years, 25 years. And then, we saw this huge spike. Still above that 2% target. And this was the fun part. So this is what I wanted to get to. And it's still expensive to live in South Florida. It is expensive to live in South Florida. Absolutely. So this is Naples, Marco Island, gap between actual median household income and qualified income. That gap is pretty large. Monetary policy. We see the risk to achieving our employment inflation goals as being roughly in balance. I'm going to skip to the bottom here. This is what I thought was very helpful. This is your summary. The point of that uncertainty is it's kind of common sense thinking that, but when the path is uncertain, you go a little bit slower. It's not unlike driving a foggy night or walking into a dark room full of furniture. You just slow down. So they have some uncertainty that they want to protect us against. But they're optimistic. They realize, maybe there's no major damage in that room with a lot of furniture, but they realize the furniture is there. So just slowing down. You're not going to see any huge jumps potentially in the interest rates. You're going to see it like a general, easing off of that Fed policy or a change to that Fed policy, but nothing major, nothing so major that we can't recover from it. So that's your Fed policy update. And I thank Brandon Box for providing that. I think it's pretty cool that we have, experts like this that are trying to give us some real data that's not, otherwise has a spin to it. All right, well, it looks like I want to get into the meat and potatoes of what I wanted to talk about today. And that is the new condo rules. So that's what you're all here for. Is it a big deal? Is it not? There are a couple of things. Let me put it in perspective for you. If you sign off in 60 seconds, I want you to remember these two things. Number one, the condo rules are different. As of December 31st, 2024, we need to now disclose new things in Florida law. We need to disclose these integrity studies, the structural studies. That is a statutory requirement. So when we looked at the condo receipts disclosure or the condo receipt form that NABOR populates, it's different now. And this isn't that different from when the governance form changed in 2021. The governance form updated, and now we need the new form. We can't use the old form. That's the same thing here. So we always knew previously you needed bylaws, covenants, FAQs, rules and regulations, financials, and the governance form. Essentially it was those 8 things or so, maybe 7 things. Well, now we've got a couple of new ones. We need annual budgets and financial statements, and we also need these SEER studies or milestone studies on top of everything else. So that old condo receipt form is no good anymore. They actually still have it, but it doesn't include the milestone studies or integrity studies. It just doesn't have it. So hopefully they'll change that. Hopefully they'll give us a chance to use that form again if we wanted to. But there's more. And so because of that, NABOR had a real thing. The second part of this is we actually have to answer questions about the milestone study. We have to answer a question about that milestone study. And so there are 3 questions, and then there are questions to those questions. So it's 6 in total that you have to answer if you're subject to this or not. And so because of all these changes, because of these new disclosures and a few others, NABOR made a pretty large shift and decided to have its own condo addendum, and we'll go over that. Now, if you've done any deals in a FAR/BAR contract, you'll realize that this is the same or a similar method for how FAR/BAR always treated it. FAR/BAR has the rider A, which is a condo disclosure, and a rider B, which is an HOA disclosure. Though, if you're in either of those types of associations, you have to use that form. Now NABOR is doing the same thing. So instead of just continuing to add and add and add to the standard contract or the as-is contract, NABOR decided we're going to use this form, and if you're in a condo, you got to use the form. All right, so that's your nutshell. If you don't use the form, you have a major problem because the buyer can terminate. If you don't include the NABOR condo addendum or the FAR/BAR rider A condo rider, if you don't include those forms and you are a condo, the buyer has the unilateral right to terminate, and they will get their deposit back, and that goes right up until closing. So that's a pretty massive shift. NABOR had avoided that forever. They had never wanted to have a condo rider or addendum the way FAR/BAR did. They just didn't really have a choice anymore. We had to do something. And there's enough meat in it that it makes sense to put it in its own form. So, you know what the silver lining is? Now FAR/BAR and NABOR are essentially the same in that regard. If you are doing contracts and you're normally doing NABOR and then you randomly jump to a FAR/BAR contract, you're going to know to add the condo rider because that's how you always did it with NABOR. So I think that's the silver lining. I'm not going to see agents forget to attach the rider or the addendum because they're going to know whether you're using NABOR or FAR/BAR, you're going to have to attach the addendum. You're just going to have to. That's the only way to do the deal. So let's look at the addendum. If people have questions, please ask them. Kim asked if the governance form is changing this year. I don't know. I haven't heard of any changes to the governance form. I don't think it's changing. They could be adding certain things, but it would really be duplicitous because all the changes that would put in that governance form are already in the new condo addendum or the condo rider. So I don't expect a governance form change. You can still use the one from 21, 22. I did mention no more condo doc receipt. I did mention that. Now, some people might choose to use it anyways. So the condo doc receipt is not statutory. You do not need to use it. In fact, let me share what that looks like really quick. All right, there it is, condo/cooperative documents receipt. This was updated. It's a 1/1/2025 form. I don't like this form anymore. I don't even know if I liked it to begin with. And you know why? Because they don't have anything in here about the milestone or Sears studies. It's just missing. So I'm not a huge fan of this anymore because if you're relying on this to check the box and saying, yep, I got everything, I got everything, I got everything. Well, if you're subject to the milestone inspections, you don't have everything. You just don't. So use this if you want to, but be aware that it doesn't cover everything potentially. And NABOR might change this year. I've already given them that feedback that they probably should add the studies in there, but it's not there yet. So you never had to use this form, and now there's maybe even a reason not to use it, at least in my view. But if you think this helps, and if the condo you're doing the closing for is not subject to those studies, then you could still use this. You could still use this. But let me jump to the forms I really wanted to talk about, if I can find it. Where did I put it? Oh, there it is. Okay, hold on. Always tough doing this live sometimes. All right, I have to go back there. We're going to delete that. And there is the first form we should go over. This is the Rider A. If you haven't done a FAR/BAR contract before, then this is news to you, but it's the way they've always done it. So they've always had Rider A for condos and Rider B for HOAs. In fact, on the sales contract, there are check boxes. Is this a condo? Check the box. Is this an HOA? Check the box. So this one is Rider A right there. And what you'll notice when we get to the NABOR form, these are pretty similar forms, the NABOR and the FAR/BAR forms. They're very similar. They do the same thing. And there's a reason. They're both statutorily based. They're basically copied and pasted from the statute for most of the things here. So you're doing a condo. Who does it? Who does this rider? The answer? The seller. The seller does the rider. I think you should do this right when you get the listing. This should be one of the things you do together with getting photos, together with coordinating the MLS listing or your marketing brochures, whatever it may be. This is hugely important to have right on the front end and have the seller either fill it all out and you can verify, or you can fill it all out and have the seller verify. The key with the verifying is that the seller needs to know that if there's anything wrong, the liability is on them, that it could jeopardize their closing. So that's why you want the seller's input. If they don't know or they refuse to verify or they say, I trust you, you just want something in writing that says, I know you trust me, I've done my absolute best, but this is ultimately a liability that you share because this will fall on you if it's not accurate. And it's also much better if you can get the seller to call the property manager or to verify the legitimacy of certain things, even if they ask neighbors. So going back to that receipt, Judy had a question. How do you verify the receipt of the condo docs without that receipt? So the rest of the state already does that. FAR/BAR does not have a condo doc receipt form. I think a simple email would be fine. That's probably how most of them do it. Thank you, got everything. Or what I would do as a listing agent is I would verify, yep, I've sent them this. I've got it all. I know it's everything. Here's my email to the buyer's agent. And then the buyer's agent confirmed that they sent it to the buyer. That's all you can do. If you want to do a separate amendment saying that the buyer confirms receipt, you could. If you're using the receipt, you could add in those milestone studies or the inspections. And maybe if your building's not subject to it, you could just use the form. This could be a big practice change. Maybe you like this form still, and you just find a workaround to continue using it. Someone else, Kim asks, how do you locate where the info is for the right of first refusal in the documents? I have a 90-year-old seller that had no clue of who her payments went to. Yeah, that's why I want the seller to verify. So you can do your best and get the answers. You're going to call the property manager. You're going to talk with the general manager. You're going to talk with the board. But at the end of the day, we can look at the condo docs together. You can call me and we'll try and find it. Usually it's in the covenants. So the declaration of condominium, it's going to be in the covenants, whether the condominium has the right of first refusal. But if you can't get that answer, or if you think you have that answer, you ultimately have to go to the buyer or you have to go to your seller and say, how do you want to answer this? I've done everything I can and I don't know where that answer is. If you want to take the conservative approach, you could simply say that the condominium does have the right of first refusal. That's the cheat sheet. That's the cheat code. Because if you say yes, then the buyer is aware, they're on notice that the condominium could always jump in and buy the property and they would have to walk away. But if you said no and you were wrong, now you have a violation. Your buyer, doesn't have to leave. Now you have a legal dispute. So if you really can't find the answer, just answer it yes. Answer it yes, and that way you're protected, because if it's no, there's no downside. And if it's yes, then you answered it correctly. That's just strategy. It's not necessarily the best legal advice in the world, but it does limit your liability, and it protects the downside. Secret asks, do I really have to mention the milestone inspection on the form? If your property is not subject to the milestone inspection, you could leave that and not worry about it. So that's probably, I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for. But ultimately, let's go through these so that you guys know how I think about each of these questions. And then the NABOR form is essentially the same. It's very, very similar. So right of first refusal, or this is the association's approval. This is a massive thing. Almost every condominium has an approval process. And when I get asked almost daily, how quickly can you close a condo? And it really depends on this answer. If the buyer needs to be approved, you probably need 3 weeks. That's typically from the time the property manager gets your application to the time you get your approval. 3 weeks is a very safe amount of time. And so if you answer yes on this, I know we probably need 3 weeks to close, minimum, because we can't close without that buyer approval. Buyer has to apply within 5 days. The association does or does not have a right of first refusal. So why do associations do this? They do this because the developers are greedy, or they have some bold strategy in mind. Maybe they're planning on selling the condo building at some point, and they want to limit the number of decision makers. So they've basically bonded together. The existing owners have bonded together, and they've decided we're going to give ourselves the best chance of actually selling this building to a developer. So it's either at the front end, the developer's being greedy, or on the back end, they're trying to maintain control. And so this is in your covenants, and it says that the association has the right to step in the shoes of that buyer, and that buyer has to walk away. If you're not aware of whether they have the right of first refusal, I would just say yes, and then you could always, correct yourself later. And then this would be the members of the association having that right. This one's really tough. So the fees, assessments, prorations, litigation, a lot of this is not statutorily required, but FAR has a place for it. If you did not include this, or if you didn't do it correctly, that's where the gray area really comes into play. So you do not, by statute, have to tell them what your dues are. You don't have to tell them what your special assessments are. You don't have to tell them the food and beverage minimum or the transfer fee or the initiation fee. Contractually, maybe you do, but legally you don't. There's no obligation. So forever, if you've been doing NABOR contracts, you never gave fees inside the contract. And my advice would be maybe put it in an email, share the website where they can find the information. Maybe you tell them it's in the condo docs that you've shared. And you tell them, hey, verify, trust but verify type of thing. But if you do know the information and you're trying to disclose this correctly and you verified it with the property manager, you're going to fill this all out. Is it monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, or annually? And so they've got these are the current assessments. So these are the regular assessments. If there's more than one assessment, you'd put another one there. If there's a rent, so condo buildings, they might be paying rent for where the pool is located. They might be paying rent to be a member of a beach club, something like that. Fees shall at closing, or seller shall pay at closing all fines imposed on the unit by the condo association. And any fees the association charges provide the information about these property assessments and fees, like the estoppel letter. So the seller always pays for estoppel letters. And then this point is just reminding you, if property is not part of the HOA, see rider, or if property is part of an HOA, you have to include rider B as well. They're trying to guide you as to what to include. Special assessments. So this is the part that starts to get a little tricky. Again, we're not statutorily required to disclose special assessments in a condo, but we may want to. Seller represents that seller is not aware of any special assessments. So you could have a fee that's $1,000 a month, and you might think it's just a regular assessment, but because of the way the documents are written, they had to make it a special assessment, or vice versa. Maybe it was easier to raise the regular assessment than it was to pass a special assessment. So they may have talked about it being special, but if legally it's regular, it changes where you put this stuff. So the property manager is hugely important, and then having your seller verify, because this is easy to make a mistake. It's easy to mess up. Litigation, again, if you don't fill any of this out, you're representing that you're not aware of it. You're basically not putting the buyer on notice of anything, and you're even worse, you're warranting or representing that there isn't anything. So in the way the FAR form is, I think the seller is obligated to put this information in here. Otherwise, the buyer can assume the number is zero. And when we get to NABOR, you'll notice it's very different, very different. In NABOR, there's no warranties when you put in the fees and all of that. So this is where we start getting to even more of the condo documents. You've got to check one here. So this is directly from the statute. The buyer hereby acknowledges that buyer has been provided a current copy of the declaration, articles of incorporation, bylaws, rules and regs, most recent annual financial statement, annual budget, FAQs, and it says more than 3 days, excluding Saturdays, Sundays, and legal holidays prior to execution of this contract. If you check that, you're waiving your condo review period. So you're always going to check D. This agreement is still voidable for the next 3 days while we review these things. So simple advice, check D. That gives you that 3-day condo review period. If for some reason you've been negotiating for a month on this and you have the right to check C, as a listing agent, that's probably better. That would work. That's good. But it does change the rules for whether you have the right to terminate within those 3 days. This is where you request or do not request a copy of the documents stated above. You're always going to request them, because it would be silly not to. I do see sometimes where a buyer already owns in that building and they flippantly say, I don't need them. I already own in there. It's okay. I don't need them. Don't do that to yourself. Just request them, because why not just take the 3 days? Even if you already have them, even if you don't read them, give yourself the 3 days so that if you need to back out for some reason, you can. If you find out that the building doesn't allow you to combine units, and that was the only reason you were doing it, you need the 3 days. This is different the second time around than it was the first time, potentially. Buyer's receipt of documents. This is a FAR specific thing that they have. Buyer, if you check this box, buyer received the documents described above on such and such date. So if you received them the day you went under contract, fill it out, put it in there, check the box. As a listing agent, I can see that being pretty valuable, because now you can take your foot off the gas knowing, yeah, I think the buyer has everything. They said they have everything. It's pretty good. We talk about common elements. Maybe you're being affiliated with a parking space or garage, a cabinet, storage locker. inspection items. Now, here are the milestone inspection reports, structural integrity reserve study, and the turnover inspection reports. This is the part that was added most recently. So up until this point, FAR is basically the same. None of this is different from the 2024 form. This part starts to get different. So is required to have a milestone study or is not? And if so, is required to have a milestone inspection report as described, but has not completed such inspection. So they did this a little differently than how NABOR does it. I think NABOR maybe is a little cleaner, but if it's required, you're going to say required. If you don't know, one, I really think you need to find out. If you don't know, if you truly don't know, you're going to say it is required because you have to over disclose rather than under disclose. I'd rather you say it's required and then, oh, thank God, we found out it's not required. I think I'd rather you do that. But this I think you need to know. It's a great opportunity to talk about what buildings are applicable and what are not. It's actually confusing, but I'm going to make it as simple as I can. 30 years old or more, and 3 stories or taller. If you have both, the answer is yes, you're required. If you have both 30 years or more and 3 stories or taller, the answer is yes. If it's less than 3 stories, you'll never need it until they change the statute, obviously. You'll never need it if it's less than 3 stories. But if it's less than 30 years, local practice might still require one of these. So this is where it gets really tricky. It seems that in Collier County, it's 30 years and 3 stories or more. That's what they want. And that would be a yes. But if you're in City of Naples, it might be 25 years because you're so close to the coast. And the statute's been modified a couple of times since it was initially passed. You can probably safely assume 30 years, 3 stories. But if you are close to the coast, you still need to verify, hey, is that still the case? Because if you're 25 years, but you're on the beach, you could be subject to this still. I'm sorry to confuse you on that. It's such a pain. My thinking on this initially was that eventually all condos would be subject to this. And I still I don't know if it's going to go that direction because this has kind of been a mess. But in my mind, I think it should be all condos every 10 years. I just think that it's simpler to execute on that. Expand it out. If you're brand new, get one of these studies. If you're 10 years old, get one of these studies. If you're 20 years old, get a study. I just think that makes the most sense. We'll see if the lobbying groups listen to me, if Congress listens to me, we'll see. But this is a Florida thing. So you've got your milestone inspections. You're going to say whether it's required, and then you have to tell it's required, but it hasn't been done. Or it's required, but it has been done. So you're just going to answer that for the milestone. The turnover inspection report is also required if the developer is turning it over to the association. So again, that's per the statute. If it's an older community, the answers are going to be no, because it's not going to be a requirement. And then the structural integrity reserve study, again, it's the 30 years and 3 stories or more. 30 years, 3 stories or more. Keep going down. Again, this is where the buyer acknowledges that they've received or they just got it. That's essentially what it says, the 3-day periods. You're always going to answer the second one. We just got it, give us the 3 days. And that's the same way you're going to answer it up here. We just got it, give me the 3 days. That's what we want. That's what I want for you. It just makes it simpler. Then we have some disclosures. This is the newest one, the multiple parcel disclosure. I'll give you a quick, simple answer on this. This is if within one condo building, there are multiple types of uses. So maybe part hotel and part residences, part rentals and part residences, hotel and business. Maybe there are retail down on the bottom floor and residential on the top floor. If you're in a building like that, we don't have that many in Collier County and Lee County, but they exist. So if you have that distinction, this is an additional disclosure in that regard. It needs to be told to a buyer because it's going to put maybe a burden or a relief on that building. For example, on Marco Island, there's a restaurant at the Apollo, which is an older condo building. There's a restaurant on the first floor, which they rent from the association, and then the rest are all just owned by individuals. Well, that restaurant's a great restaurant, but how that rent is distributed, the expenses of that unit, how that's distributed, it's important to know as a buyer. You need to know. So this law was required to be added into it. So that's FAR bar. Whew, that's a lot, right? That's a lot. Sigrid asked, 30 years, 3-story and above. But what about 3 miles from the beach? I thought that was also a requirement. So when it first came out, the statute said if you were within 3 miles of the beach, it actually didn't even say that. It said the water. If you're 3 miles from water, the water, I don't even know what it said. It was confusing to me. And so they had to change it. They said if it was within 3 miles of the coast, then you had to do it within 25 years. Well, they've modified the language to say if you are within 3 miles of the coast, your local enforcement agency might require it at 25 years of age. So that's why City of Naples, if you're in City of Naples and you're 3 stories or more, you're probably subject to this if you're at least 25 years, not 30. And so you'd ask the property manager, you'd ask the seller to verify. If you couldn't get the answer, you'd say yes. You need to know, and that needs to be disclosed. It's tough. You know, they've definitely blundered this statute and the rollout of it because now there's so many little tentacles to it, and people are now having to deal with it, including you and I. It's a lot. All right, so that's FAR bar. Keep that fresh in your mind. There's a little bit of work you need to do. You've got to get all the fees. My advice to you on fees, if you don't know, or if it's $1,000 a month today, but 30 days from now it's going to go to $1,200 a month, put the $1,200. Over disclosing will not hurt the seller. Because you can put the form, put $1,200, and then when you send it to the buyer, you can say, hey, we disclosed $1,200, but I think it's only $1,000. We just had trouble getting a confirmation from the property manager. Or it's only $1,000 now. It doesn't change to $1,200 until next year. If you instead disclose $1,000 and it quickly jumps to $1,200 and you were wrong, now the buyer either has the right to negotiate for you to cover that difference or even back out of the deal. So don't do that. Just over disclose rather than under disclose. Oh, if you don't know, over disclose. And then I trust you guys to sell it to the buyer that, hey, we over disclosed. We were trying to confirm. We wanted to get you this sooner. So, and then they can verify what it will really be. All right, Joey asks, if buyers ask for advice on how to review and what to look for on a milestone study, do we refer them to an attorney? Yeah, I think you can. I haven't reviewed that many, but I'd be happy to. What I usually recommend a buyer do is that they need to review it first. They need to look at it. They need to read it because it's buyer beware. It's the buyer's job. They're the ones that live there. They're the ones spending the money on it. I can only help them so much if they didn't bother to read it. So they need to read it. If they have questions, they should call their inspector to verify, hey, I'm seeing that the siding is all degrading and they're going to need to replace it in the next 3 years. Is that a concern? You're already paying the inspector. They're the engineer. They're the contractor. I would definitely recommend them. Now, if it's a budgetary thing where it looks like, the reserve study is saying you're under saving, you're not saving enough for this future expense, and you call me to verify that and to how does that work and what are my rights to get out of the contract or not, that's what I'm really good at. I can kind of hang a picture. I'm more of a documents guy. So if you want to refer them to me, that's part of my services. We can review anything. As far as condo docs in general, I give the same advice. Read it, look for what's important to you. So if you plan on renting it, Look at the rental restrictions. If it's going to be your primary residence and you don't want all your neighbors to be rentals, look for the rental restrictions. If you have a little dog, look for the pet restrictions. If you want your grandkids to be there and use it when you're not, look at the, membership and common elements, amenities usage. That's how you read it. You don't need to overthink how many votes each unit gets and, Class A members versus Class B. Who cares about that? I want to know if I can rent. That's what I care about. And if you have questions, call me. I would love to help you with that. So hopefully that answers that question. All right, before my voice gives out, let's look at NABOR. All right, so that's FAR-BAR. So NABOR attacks this a little bit differently. The FAR-BAR listing agreement that's currently out there is dated July of 2024. NABOR has one that's dated January 1st of 25. You have to use the new form, and there's a reason. They added all the condo stuff in the listing agreement. I don't know why we did that. That probably wasn't smart. I think it was overkill, because think about the listing agreements between the seller and the broker. It's behind closed doors. I need the seller to tell me this stuff so then I can go market it. So I suppose it has some limited value because you can go back to the seller and say, you told me it wasn't subject, and that's what I told the buyers. But it's really just a bottleneck at the front end to get you to get this listing agreement signed. I don't want you to have bottlenecks. Honestly, on the listing agreement, if you wanted to, just check the box. It's all required and it hasn't been done. It's all required and it hasn't been done. And then verify later. I just want the listing agreement signed, and I think you do too. So if you look at this section here, H, this is what they added. Seller acknowledges receipt of the Collier County Code. If the property is a condominium or cooperative, the seller shall disclose the following. The association is required and it hasn't been done or has been done. Association is or is not required and it has or has not been done, and it is or is not required. So those 3 questions with the sub question. You get to this and you're like, I don't know, I'm just listing it. Make sure you use the new form and answer the questions. If you don't know the answer or the seller doesn't know the answer, just say it is required and it has not been done. It's the safest way to put it. That way your seller is protected. You're not caught up in it. And then you can tell your seller, say, hey, look, we're just going to check the box here, but I need you to call the property manager and get answers to all this. That's your job. That's your homework. Let me get everything coordinated with the pictures, with putting all the marketing together. I'm going to reach out to colleagues within my business, but your job is to do this. And then, maybe you can't do that. Maybe your seller's incapable, but at least they know now they're asking you to do something extra. So hopefully that's helpful. That's why you need the updated listing agreement with NABOR. You didn't necessarily need it with FAR-BAR. FAR-BAR's is still from 2024. All right, so we're going to delete that. Everything else is fine on that form. So here's your condo form. This is that big new form. It's kind of scary. I don't love it. It looks ugly. It looks really ugly. I don't like it. The reason why it's ugly is we basically just copied from the statute and pasted it into the form. You'll notice, like in the second sentence, they already talk about the Florida statutes. First thing the next thing they notice is all the disclosures that the seller is obligated to give to a buyer. It's all those things on the receipt plus more. And it's why I don't like the receipt anymore. So declaration of condo, articles of incorporation, bylaws, annual financial and annual budget, copy of the milestone inspection report, if applicable, most recent structural integrity study or reserve study, or that they haven't, a letter saying that they haven't done one, copy of the inspection report for turnover inspection, document titled frequently asked questions, copy of the governance form. So that list does not match up what's on the condo receipt. That's why I don't love the receipt anymore. There's 9 things, and technically it doubles up on 1 or 2. So it's at least 10 things that's in here that are not on the receipt entirely. So don't start there. Buyer, by execution of this addendum, hereby requests a current copy of the above documents, which seller shall pay for and provide at seller's expense. This is an improvement over how FARBAR does it. FARBAR, you check the box, we want it or we don't. Here, we want it. I think that's better for us. We all want it. Everyone wants it. Everybody wants it. We've got a disclosure. This, I think, is better than FARBAR as well. Because you know how I said, always choose B, always choose the second one, saying, please give it to me, I want it. That's what this says. I want my 3-day review period. You don't have to check the box. So again, NABOR is winning, other than it's a little ugly. I don't like the way the form looks. But NABOR is winning so far. They cleaned up how these questions are answered. It's a little more condensed. I like this better as well. So it is required or is not, and the association has or has not done it. So the milestone inspections, the structural integrity reserve study, and the turnover inspection. Very quickly, the difference between the first two, milestone inspection is the actual inspection report. This is broken, that's not working, this is fine, that's fine. The reserve study is when they take that report and they compare it to how much money the association has in their pockets. So they say, well, the roof only has 5 years remaining, but you haven't reserved enough to replace it in 5 years. They have to match up. And the obligation of the association at that point would be to change their budgets to account for the reserves. They need to balance that reserve study and your budgets. They have to be the same by law. This is a huge deal. The association cannot defer collecting that money. They have to have enough where not only do we have enough up to this point, but if we have 5 years left, that we're reserving enough going forward so that we can pay for it out of pocket. You know, we don't need to take a big loan. Judy has a question. Go ahead, Judy. You have to unmute yourself.
Unmute.
Go ahead, we can hear you.
We have several listings where the condo association is only sharing the milestone summary, which is a 1-page, instead of the actual report itself.
Okay.
According to this, it's required the report itself. Is that correct?
Well,
not just the summary.
I haven't seen that be litigated yet. The thing that's interesting about the statute is it created all new words, and we had to kind of understand what that even meant. If they're just giving you the summary, that's probably enough. If the report's not available, the summary is a version of the report. I think it's fine. I think it's okay.
And one more quick question.
Yeah.
The reserves, once it's discovered by the condo association that they may or may not have a shortfall, don't they have a certain amount of time, or has that period already passed?
It's already passed.
Okay, so those and who an engineer is not really an accountant, or who is
they
the
kind
one?
of are. So yeah, so interestingly, reserve studies are done across the country. They've been done for decades. It's just that they were never statutorily required. And so condominiums might do them this year and then skip it for 30 years because they didn't even think to do it again. It's just that now it's required. It's every 10 years, you got to get an updated one. So this is something that engineers are very capable of doing. They've been doing it for a long time, and they will just match up. Basically, if they think your roof has 5 years left, they'll go get a quote for how much a new roof will be. They'll add in inflation and all that other stuff, and then they'll evaluate how much you're saving for it into that account and say, you have enough, it looks right, or you don't have enough, you got to raise your contributions. So that came in effect at the end of last year, where all these associations had to budget to be completely funded on all of those structural items. They can't defer them anymore.
So there's no conflict of interest if the engineering firm is also the one giving the estimate or quote to have brought those reserves up to.
Um, no, because that's what they're being hired to do.
Paid
They're
for. Okay.
required to do it. If the conflict would only come in if they misrepresented anything in those reports because of some sort of other bias or conflict. So if they didn't want to upset the association, and so they kind of manipulated the roofer's quote. So they said, hey, Dana, get me a roofing quote, but cut it down by 30% because I don't want to upset my customer. They're not buying a new roof anyways. It's not going to hurt them. It's fine. If they did that, that's illegal. They can't do that. They would violate their license, their ethical duties, and their contractual obligations, as well as maybe statutory. So I hope there's no conflict. If there is, that's probably against the law.
So the reserve budget number has to match whatever the reserve study,
Yeah.
the structural reserve study shows.
Yeah. Yep. So the structural reserve study will say the roof has 5 years of remaining life. So then the study will say, all right, well, if you only have 5 years, here's how much you need to be saving. And then the association has a duty to match their budget to the study.
Okay. Thank you.
It is a well-oiled machine. It should be a good circle where it all ties together at the end of the day. But you can tell how scary it is to these associations that forever had the ability to just defer. I'll give you an example, Judy. I bought a condo in Atlanta, and during the 2008 recession, people were losing their houses. They were being foreclosed on, and they were losing their jobs. And so the association made a deliberate decision to defer maintenance and to defer increases in the dues. So for a decade, the dues were artificially low, and there was built up deferred maintenance. It was a disaster. So come 2018, those owners had to pay me. I think the dues tripled, and they had to do a big special assessment, $25,000 each homeowner. It was really brutal. Well, in Florida, that'll never happen again, hopefully. Hopefully. It'll all be kind of more regular. The problem is getting everyone up to speed in a matter of a year or two was pretty rough.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question, Judy. I appreciate it. All right, so see if I can quickly finish the rest of this. Again, I like this. I think it works. It has standard language in here. So again, you don't have to choose. We've already received this study and we don't need to review. It's going to make that request already. We get the 3 days to review. It has the same disclosure summary for the multi-parcel buildings. I think that's great. There's no more separate forms. So last year, they actually created a form for the multi-parcel building. And if you were in that kind of situation, you had to include it. Well, now it's just automatic. You've got that disclosure. You don't have to add it separately. The buyer's now aware. It has basic right of first refusal stuff where you don't have to check the box. So again, NABOR's winning. They just keep winning on this form. Hazard insurance, assessments and fines, statutory advisory. They have everybody sign. And then this is a huge deal. This is a massive deal. If you remember back on FARBAR, you were required to disclose all the fees. Well, when the Legal Resources Committee started creating this form, a lot of the brokers and agents on that committee said, we want a place to put the fees. And all the lawyers, myself included, said, you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that because if you do it wrong, you're going to have some liability. Whereas if you didn't do it at all, you have no liability. And the broker said, agents are going to want to put it somewhere. So if we don't give them a place, then you're going to get it in other terms and conditions. You're going to get it on some amendment or addendum. Let's give them a place to put it. This is the compromise. So I don't like this. I think it's a pain in the neck. Basically, they put it after the signature page for a reason, and you need to know that. It's different. It is not a requirement per the contract, and it is not a requirement per Florida law. It's just if you wanted to disclose and create some possible confusion or maybe create some answers, this is where you would do it. So the following information is provided for buyer's reference, is not warranted by seller or broker, and is not required by statute. Buyer must verify the accuracy of the information below by referring to the association documents. I hope you can appreciate the political wrangling that got that language added, because what it's meant to do is if you put 1,000 down as the assessment and when we close they up it to 1,200, the seller can say, I didn't warrant that information. You were supposed to verify. So be careful. Just be careful. I still like the advice of over disclosing. If you think it's going up to 1,200, put 1,200. It's not going to hurt you. I just don't like the idea of under disclosing and then saying it's not my problem. So either leave it blank and tell the buyer, look, you're going to have to find that out, but here's what I think it is. You could do that. But now you have a place. It is a safe place that you could put information. Just don't under disclose. Don't under disclose, because you could say what the quarterly assessment is. You could say what the special assessment is, but you miss the initiation fee or the capital contribution or the one-time transfer fee. You miss a bunch of things, which adds another $7,000 to the bottom line. The buyer's not going to love that, even if it had that language in there. So just be very careful. Be careful. It does have a place where you can put the contact information for the association. It is important to get that right. You do have to get that right, because what it does is if you gave them the wrong information, they could use that to get more time to apply. So be careful in that form. All right, that was a lot. That was a lot. If you want a shorter, condensed version of that video on YouTube, I already have a 12-minute video just on the NABOR form. This one's a lot more in depth, but whatever you guys need, I'm here to help. So here's my takeaway. 30 years and 3 stories or more. You're going to be saying yes to those things. The milestone and the structural reserve study. 30 years or 3 stories or more, you're going to be saying yes. And then as a lawyer, I'm going to tell you, get your seller to verify. Get your seller to verify. And then if you're saying yes, you need those reports in hand so you can give them to the buyer. You need it. You need it. On both NABOR and FARBAR, you have to attach the condo disclosure or the Rider A condominium disclosure. You have to. You have to. You have to. You have to. It's now the same. NABOR and FARBAR, you have to add it. So I think that's a good thing. And then always request for the 3 days. Always request for the 3 days. NABOR does it for you. I like NABOR. It makes it a lot more user-friendly. But in FARBAR, you can get to the same place. Just check, I want my 3 days. I want my 3 days. And then finally, the turnover inspection report. That's when a developer turns the property over to the members. That is a new statutory requirement. You're not going to see that as often. But if you had any sort of turnover, I think since 2023 going forward, if you had a turnover of a condo, 3 stories or more, 30, or not 30 years, but 3 stories or more, you're going to have that turnover requirement. Mark asks, or maybe it's Don, can the association refuse to give that information to the buyer? They may say that it has to come directly from the seller. I've seen that. I've seen where the condo refuses to give it to the realtor more realistically. So the seller has a statutory right to all that information. It is their right to get it for free. So tell your seller that. Say, you can get it, and not only can you get it, but you can get it for free, whereas I might have to pay for it. The buyer may be restricted from it. Property managers don't want to talk to more people than they have to. So if you're not an owner, they tend to give you a stiff arm. So be careful. For 2-story buildings, can the seller add NA for the Sears milestone study? Yes, they can. If you are 2 stories, 1 story, you can say no for those. You can say not required, not required, not required. And then don't answer the other questions. Just leave them blank. So not required, not required, not required if you're 1 or 2 stories. And if you don't know if it's 3 stories or taller, 30 years or older, the answer is yes. If you don't know, the answer is yes. And then we'll figure out the rest. And on the listing agreement, don't let it stop you. Just answer in the safest way possible, get it signed, and then we can always amend it. We're gonna have to do a condo disclosure anyways. Get it right on the condo disclosure. One final thing, some lawyers, I don't know, I'm on the fence about it. Some lawyers want a condo disclosure even if you went under contract last year but haven't closed yet. So you may want to do that. If you're a listing agent and you want to cover all your bases, you could do a condo disclosure, have the seller sign it, send it over to the buyer. If they don't sign it, I don't care. As long as you disclosed it, I think you're okay. I hope that helps. I hope that helps. Good luck, everybody. If you have specific questions, call me. If you want to work on a closing together, I would love that. I am optimistic about this year. My real question is, I think we're going to be busy this spring, but how long will it last? Will it stay strong into May, June, July, or will it fizzle out after May? That's the key in my mind. I think a really strong market has legs to it. It goes through June and July and then pops back up in the fall. But if we have a weak year, we'll still have a season, and then we'll have another long summer, which I know last year was tough. So I'm praying for all of you. If you need me, call me. And if you can't, if you need someone at my office, feel free to call the office. But I wish you luck. I'll see you next week. Bye, guys.